In my research with Nicholas Christakis, we've looked at how one person can influence another. But dramatically, when we look at whole networks at once, the fact that one person can influence another creates this superstructure in the network as a whole, so that we find these clusters of behavior and of emotions that extend out to 3 degrees of separation. So what that means is that I don't have to know anything about you other than the fact that your friend's friend's friend is happy, or your friend's friend's friend is obese, and it increases the likelihood that you'll be the same way because you live in these clusters that we would never have known about if we hadn't seen the whole network all at once.
Maybe the best conceptual example is just what physicists call a phase transition, say in water. So we have a water molecule is a very simple object, two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. You could study a water molecule for the rest of your life, and many people do, in fact, in physics, understanding all the properties of the specific molecule. But there's nothing in that study that would ever give you the idea that at some point, if you heat up liquid water, there will come a transition when suddenly it will turn into a gas. Or likewise, when you cool liquid water to the freezing point, suddenly and abruptly and without warning, that system will have a collective behavior that suddenly changes from a liquid where it can flow to this solid thing that is hard and resists someone pushing on it and becomes slippery. So there are new qualitative kind of properties that just come into existence suddenly without your ability to predict them. This kind of emergence also affects us in our own lives. So, for example, I mentioned the idea of a traffic jam on the roadway. Everyone's had this experience. You're driving along, suddenly the road seizes up. You drive for 10 minutes very slowly, and you never actually find anyone who caused the traffic jam, and then you come out the other side. That's very similar to what happens in systems such as water, where you get this collective organization that suddenly changes.
For me, it's really emergence is related to how from microscopic interactions we can get macroscopic long-range ordering of systems that you cannot easily predict from the interaction among single individuals or from the properties or attributes of the single unit in the system. Examples goes from the typical and very classical example of ants colony, in which ants have are able to develop large and sophisticated forms of collective behavior just by simple signals among the individual ants. Two other examples that are like the internet as a global system. We know that the internet doesn't have a blueprint or a master control or anyone that really can be planning for the internet as a whole. However, we have at the end of the day a system that basically works day by day, that involves millions of users, and that's for sure the outcome of an emergent phenomenon in which many interacting agents are able at the end to create a collective ordering for the system that merge technical and market and social behavior in something that works in every business day.
Well, emergence focuses on that core challenge in the sciences and the social sciences of going from micro to macro. And you can't necessarily deduce micro characteristics from macro characteristics or vice versa. Thus, for example, the classic example is that of segregation, where as Tom Schelling showed in his classic work in the 1970s, mild preferences to be with at least others who are not dramatically unlike yourself can lead to systems that are sharply segregated by a variety of characteristics. And similarly, we can see, like in my work on trade systems, that a preference to not be shut out of the markets of other countries meant that one treaty led to other countries signing treaties with those signatory countries, and then other countries still yet signing more treaties and so on.
Emergence means that the interaction of single elements leads to new properties of the system. And that basically creates all the complexity of our world, from biology to social systems. So, for example, the formation of lanes of uniform walking direction in counter streams of pedestrians is one example where we have a more fluent organization or something even like a collective intelligence based on local interactions. Another example is the emergence of cooperation in situations where people have competitive interactions, or even the creation of social norms.
Financial markets are much more than just, let's say, the place where people buy and sell. Because, I mean, of course, you go to in a financial market just to buy and sell. But in the end, you see that during time, it evolves a lot of specialization of the different actors. You have actors which specialize in doing what is called, for example, market making, meaning that you buy and sell continuously because you provide a service to other people. And there are other people which are buying or selling, or just because they are interested, they want to invest in a given stock or in a given commodity, or because, I mean, they want to speculate on that. So you see that you have just by the interaction in a place, by doing some action, you have the fact that you observe a specialization and something which is very complex in the dynamics of the price formation.
Well, it's quite clear that language is an emergent phenomenon. There is no global control, there is no prior design, there's nobody that can influence directly the language that's being used by others. So the language as a coherent set of words and grammatical constructions and possible meanings is something that is always emergent from the individual activities of each of the speaking agents, let's say.
The idea that some pattern, some order, something that we recognize can emerge out of the complete randomness that takes place at a small level is truly one of the most inspiring concepts. Even in the beginning of the Christian and Jewish Bible, and also the books of many other cultures, the concept that order can spring out of chaos is inspiring. In the case of my research, the most dramatic example is water. That if you, for example, cool water and freeze it in the freezer, then the water molecules, which are completely moving around almost randomly in the liquid, suddenly become ordered in a very precise array. This is a very old example, but believe it or not, the concept of studying such systems and the ordering in such liquids as water is very much alive today.
Well, emergence is one of the most fascinating aspects in dynamical systems. You know the rules of the parts of the system, and yet a very surprising pattern emerges. In my own personal work, the most important example of emergence that I have been focusing on is emergence in evolution. We have built artificial worlds in the computer and simulated evolution of hypothetical organisms. And what we see is an emergence of a self-organized pattern in which you get groups of species that basically do the same thing in life. They take the same ecological niche, self-organized niche. So we think that if you look at nature, at the species, that there are countless species, but actually they are grouped into a limited number of emerging similar kinds of organisms.
You have a number of entities that interact with each other, and these entities are very well described. But out of the interactions, a new form appears that is very different from the individual components, and we call that form an emergent or a new phase. Example, I'm going to give you two examples. You have a bunch of atoms interacting together, and after a while, given the right temperature, pressure, and so on, you end up with a solid block of matter, say, instead of just atoms. You know, you feed it, you can hit it, and it will bounce back. In the case of social systems, you can look at people. People interact with each other, they transact, they talk, they call each other, and so on. But after a fairly large set of interactions that are frequent, you get a society. that society could not have predicted from the interactions of looking at individuals necessarily.
Emergence is one of those words that the general public loves a lot. Science popularization people likes a lot, but as scientists, we have no idea what it means. We think that we have some idea, that we think of it as being the emergence of some order state in a system where there previously wasn't any. But scientifically speaking, there is no precise definition of emergence. There is nothing we can actually measure. So that would actually say, here is an emergent property. However, just about every system where there is something new appearing is actually called emergence. It's really hard to define what it is. It's a bit like pornography. You know when you see it, but it's really difficult to find a precise definition of what it means and how you see it.
Let's take an ant isolated from its background. It's certainly quite a simple object. Its repertoire of behaviors is quite simple. We can conclude that there is not that much that can be done by an ant. However, let's now consider the entire society, an ant society, and now the situation is quite different. This society is able to compute, for example, it's able to choose among the optimum search paths to food. It's able to create large-scale structures like an ant nest, and obviously this is a property, an emergent property, that cannot be explained on the basis of the simple repertoires of behaviors of an individual ant.